great panelists. I hope that after you hear from them, you'll be energized like we are to continue the fight against the dirty and dangerous gas infrastructure in Maryland. So our first speaker is Anthony Field, CCAN. He's the Maryland Campaign Coordinator, Chesapeake Climate Action Network. And Susan Olsen of the Sierra Club, Maryland, is the chair of the Lower Eastern Shore Group. John Groutt is chair of Advocacy and Public Policy Committee of the Wicomico Environmental Trust. And Diana Younts is the founder of the Climate Justice Wing of the Maryland Legislative Coalition. And then we'll wind up with David Smedick, who's the senior campaign representative for the Sierra Club in the Mid-Atlantic. And just as a reminder, if you have questions, put them in the chat box, and we'll be harvesting them at the end. So Anthony, would you like to begin the program?
Yeah, absolutely. Everybody bear with me for just a moment while I go ahead and share my screen. Feel free to stare at my face as I move things around on my computer.
Well, I love that moon.
Okay. How does that look on your end? I cannot see what you all are seeing. Are you seeing a slide that says fossil fuels in Maryland? Does it all fit in the screen okay?
Mm-hmm. It looks good.
Great. Okay, so yeah, thank you, Betsy, for kicking us off here. My name is Anthony Field, Maryland Campaign Coordinator with the Chesapeake Climate Action Network, focused on our No New Fossil Fuels campaign, fighting back, combating fossil fuel infrastructure expansion, improving regulations, fighting for stronger regulations, and really working to move Maryland to become fossil-free. Fossil-free and MD is a hashtag I'm starting to try and coin for some of our initiatives here. So if anybody wants to use that, feel free to do so. Just make sure to credit me. And I apologize if you hear rustling in the background. My dogs are impatient because they're supposed to get dinner about 5 minutes ago, and I forgot to feed them.
Oops.
So
Emergency.
Yeah, I know. They're a little upset with me, but I'm just going to go ahead and kick off here. So I'm sure most people on this call already know that fossil fuel infrastructure isn't just endangering our futures by way of accelerating and worsening the climate crisis. So this slide here has a few bullet points about some of the negative impacts that fossil fuel infrastructure does. And there's also a bullet point here at the beginning about our governor's plan to invest more than $100 million to, quote, kickstart a gas expansion across the state. And that is in spite of these concerns here and some other issues that I'm going to mention in just a moment. So this $100 million came out of a settlement merger between AltaGas, a Canadian company, and Washington Gas, a local company. And Governor Hogan and his administration, involved themselves in this process and through it set aside this money, 30 million of which will need to be recouped by Maryland ratepayers. That is in direct contradiction to Maryland's climate goals. It's in direct opposition to where we need to be as a society, not just local communities, states, but as a country and as a planet, to ensure that we start to mitigate and prevent some of the worst effects of the climate crisis. At the beginning of the call, Betsy was mentioning the fires over in California, but it's not just that. We have increased hurricanes. I'm from Texas, and I worked briefly with the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, after Hurricane Harvey and Hurricane Maria, and worked directly with a lot of those communities impacted by that. And hurricanes like that are only going to increase in frequency and increase in strength and destructive power as the climate crisis worsens. So the governor, on one hand, saying he wants to be seen as a green governor, and he wants to be praised for banning fracking in the state, which is great, or being supportive of banning fracking, which is great. On the other hand, he's sort of slapping us in the face by doubling down on increasing fracked gas expansion infrastructure in the state. So that's the last thing I'm going to say about our wonderful governor at the moment. But going off of these bullet points here, yes, absolutely, there's a whole list of concerns that stem from public health concerns with increased asthma rates, birth defects, relating to the pandemic right now. There are studies coming out more often that are showing the link between indoor and outdoor air pollution increasing the probability of contracting COVID, but also being more prone to the adverse effects of the coronavirus. And we do know that the pandemic is affecting low-income, minority, traditionally disenfranchised communities more often than wealthier communities, as many are forced to still go into work and, expose themselves. Combine that with the issue of this infrastructure often being built in those same communities, such as incinerators or compressor stations, coal-fired power plants, what have you. You see how it's just an exponential increase in the dangers to those communities. And that's, I'm sorry, I'm kind of tripping over myself here, but that is a grave injustice that I think everybody on this call wants to fight about. And I hope that we continue to fight. We are collaborating. We have all these wonderful sponsors and co-sponsors. And, as we continue moving closer and closer to these deadlines we know we have to completely divest from fossil fuels, I hope that we come together passionately and strongly in opposition to plans like our governor has. I guess I mentioned them one last time, to expand gas. So I want to play a quick 1.5-minute video for you all. So bear with me while I pull this up on the screen. And I'm going to play a few seconds of the sound, and then I'm going to come back on just to make sure that everybody can hear it. So let's get this going.
Oh my God!
Can y'all hear that sound?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Great. All right, I'm going to play the video.
Whoever's in those houses is dead.
A very significant story that's unfolding in Massachusetts, where multiple gas explosions have caused major fires and evacuations.
Multiple buildings have been destroyed here from a gas explosion.
This is unlike anything they have ever seen before on their time with the department. Some of these.
There were 18 fires burning simultaneously in Andover alone.
It was like hell on earth. It really was.
The window started rattling. Next thing I saw was a bunch of flames right over here.
It sounded like a jet, almost like just a giant roar, and then the biggest boom I've ever heard in my life.
Deadly gas explosion in a Baltimore neighborhood, shattering 3 homes. Firefighters searching the wreckage. Reports of children trapped in rubble. 1 woman was killed, at least 6 others injured.
The view from the sky revealed a large swath of the neighborhood reduced to embers and ash. More than 50 homes were destroyed and more than 100 damaged.
And don't forget Silver Spring.
Right.
In Columbia, Maryland.
Fortunately, in Columbia, I don't think we had a lot of less loss of life because it was weekends.
No life, but a big building.
Absolutely, yeah. A friend of ours had an office in the building that blew up, and it was a Sunday, so she wasn't there. Thank goodness. Anthony?
Oh, I'm muted. I'm sorry, guys. I'm sitting here talking, and everyone was just talking over me, and I was like, okay, well. I apologize for that. So what I was saying was, I'm so sorry to kind of start us off on such a dark, dreary note here, but I think it's extremely important to highlight the immediate concerns we have. Like, I mean, obviously we know that there's this whole list of concerns. We know about the pollution, we know about the threats to climate, but that's not always the best way to bring about these issues when talking to people, normal people who might not always be as privy to these issues as we are. And these explosions, the threat and significant loss to life and property is obvious and evident and increasing rapidly in their, how often they occur. So when you talk to people about these issues, make sure to talk to people about these explosions. Name Baltimore, name Columbia, Maryland, Silver Spring. I think a few weeks ago there was a gas explosion in Corpus Christi, Texas. Make this come to the forefront, make the fossil fuel companies address these issues, make the politicians that support this infrastructure and infrastructure build out address and, face these issues head on, because they are the reason behind this. And with regards to the explosion a year ago in Columbia, Maryland, a state report recently was released that found Baltimore Gas and Electric at fault for the explosion due to their failure to comply with safety standards. And they were running their electrical lines in the same trenches they were running their gas lines. It doesn't take a scientist to know that electricity that could possibly spark or what have you could set off gas into an explosion, and that is exactly what happened. And what's more concerning about that is that that same type of construction is present in 250 sites around central Maryland that will now have to be redesigned and reconstructed. And we hope that there isn't another tragedy before that happens. And as I already mentioned, in face of those tragedies, despite all of this, the rapidly intensifying climate change, despite the explosions, despite the huge concern to public health, environmental justice, despite all of that, our state wants to put more money into expanding this infrastructure. And we are fighting back. When I say we, I mean CCAN, but certainly our other co-sponsors and sponsors here are fighting back on it as well. But one of the fights that I've been focused on, Sierra Club and CCAN and Wicomico Environmental Trust have been focused on, is fighting back two proposed pipelines on the Eastern Shore. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So what happened to the 200-mile Delmarva pipeline? So a lot of you have asked me about this, and a lot of you may know about this one, but not about the new pipelines that are proposed. So out of that settlement, one of the first propositions to come to the state was the proposal to build a 200-mile long pipeline through Delaware, through the Eastern Shore, and ending up somewhere in Virginia. I don't remember off the top of my head. But since then, that proposal seems to largely be dead. And the running assumption is that the company behind it, Chesapeake Utilities, has decided to segment the 200 miles into smaller 6-mile, 12-mile, what have you, projects. That way only those impacts on those smaller projects are considered, as opposed to a whole long cumulative impact of 200 miles of construction and operation of a pipeline is considered. So that's our assumption of their sneaky way of getting this pipeline with the strategy of segmenting the projects. So out of that segmentation, the first two proposals that we have seen are the Delmar pipeline, which is going to come from Delaware into the Eastern Shore through the middle of Salisbury, and the Chesapeake Utilities project, which would connect to the end of that previous pipeline, and then finally end connecting to Eastern Corrections Institution and University of Maryland Eastern Shore, all while threatening the ecosystems, the drinking water, and causing damage to the land and further causing damage to our climate, but also brings into question the large environmental justice concerns for the area, specifically the low-income, traditionally disenfranchised communities that this gas is going to work to power, as well as the fact that UMES is at HBCU and ECI being a prison. I hope you guys are kind of seeing a running theme here with gas infrastructure affecting disenfranchised communities and being built in these communities. That's not by accident, that's by design. So this first pipeline, the Del Mar Energy Pathway Project, Somerset Extension is the official title of that, is 6.8 miles of 10-inch diameter pipeline. It's going to be installed parallel to Route 13 from Salisbury to Eden. And there are 5 crossings of water sources, and the rivers and water sources are listed here on the screen. And the concern with that is the type of construction they're using, horizontal directional drilling. It has a risk of blowback and a risk of involuntary return is what they call it. Essentially, they don't stop the flow of the stream. So throughout the construction, there's a possibility of releasing sediment and pollutants and construction pollutants into the stream, thus contaminating the water. But also this type of construction is dangerous to the surrounding homes and the surrounding buildings. In New Jersey, a few months ago, there was a pipeline construction happening with the same sort of open trench method. And there was a blowback that caused sludge water to flood a basement and up to the first floor of a home. There was a small explosion. It broke up the foundation of this home. It flooded the entire house, and they ended up having to condemn the house due to this type of construction method. Now, the company, Chesapeake Utilities, has stated that there will be efforts made to decrease the likelihood of stuff like that to happen, though no specific efforts were made. So that is still a real and concerning issue. With regards to this project specifically, there will be an upcoming Board of Public Works vote on the wetland license for this pipeline. We had anticipated it happening September 23rd, but maybe not so surprising, the Maryland Department of the Environment is dragging their feet in getting the Board of Public Works their recommendations from their hearing they held on July 7th. So from what we heard from staff members with the Board of Public Works is that that vote will take place sometime late October. So I know CCAN will be in communication, Sierra Club will be in communication. I'm sure HoCo and the other groups here will communicate with everybody on this call when that meeting or when that hearing is set so that people could attend, speak, submit comments or what have you. So just be on the lookout for that. That is a real tangible way to defeat this pipeline. If we get 2 of the 3 Board of Public Works members, Comptroller Francho, Treasurer Kopp, Governor Hogan, which is a bit of a stretch, to vote no on this, then we could essentially put a stop to this pipeline. So keep that in mind and keep that at the forefront. Here's a map of the project. These little, I don't know if you can see my mouse on the screen, but there's 5 blue boxes across the path, and that's actually where the pipeline crosses these wetlands. So I just wanted to give you guys that visual representation here. This is the second portion of the pipeline, the Chesapeake Utilities project, 11 miles, 8-inch diameter pipeline, end users being ECI and UMES. It too will cross a number of wetlands. And this is having a hearing soon, September 17th, an MDE virtual public hearing on the wetland license, I believe, September 17th. We hope to share in a follow-up email RSVP information and such like that so people can RSVP, attend, speak. I am currently developing frequently asked questions sheet, talking points, messaging document, or what have you that people can refer to so that if they want to speak, they can have a resource to pull from. And I'm more than happy to speak with individuals about crafting comments for this hearing. Again, it is a vitally important hearing, similar to the Board of Public Works hearing on the other pipeline. CCAN will also be developing written comments, I believe, that we'll be submitting as an organization that will also allow people to sign on to if you choose to. And again, here is the map of that specific extension, starting at Eden, where the last one started, going down to ECI and UMES. So I do have one more slide after this, but I want to share this here on the screen in case people want to write it down. But again, something that you can do right now is looking to RSVP to those hearings. Don't worry, all of this info will be sent in a follow-up email. But we also have a Board of Public Works petition. Right now we have a little more than 400 signees on that. We have a goal of getting to 1,000 collectively, working with our partners, Sierra Club, HoCo. reaching 1,000 signees on that before the vote in October. So please follow this link or just wait for that follow-up email and you can sign on to that petition. Alternatively, there is an organization opposition letter. There's two different ones. There's one that CCAN wrote. I think we have 34 organizations signed on to that. We have a goal of getting to 50 before the Board of Public Works vote. And Diana Younts, who I believe will be speaking later on this evening, has a letter, an expertly done letter that's a few pages long that she's also seeking sign on to. So please look at signing on to those and contacting Diana about signing on to her letters. I was also asked to mention a little bit about offshore wind and kind of where we're at with the projects in Ocean City at the time being. For those of you that don't know, in May of 2017, the Maryland Public Service Commission approved 2 applications from 2 different companies, US Wind and Ørsted, to build projects off the coast of Ocean City. That would produce a combined 368 megawatts of energy, powering about 500,000 homes and creating local jobs there in Ocean City, but also creating a new industry of jobs in Baltimore as a manufacturing hub for these turbines. And I have links to the 2 website or to the 2 companies there if you're interested in looking at their project pages or what have you. So the most recent news is that the Maryland Public Service Commission, I want to say last month, approved Ørsted's use of 12 megawatt turbines for their skipjack wind project off the coast. There was a hearing January 18th of last year, or no, of this year, that was in dispute, or was a hearing to decide whether or not the PSC would approve new, taller turbines. The thing is, as efficiency grows and as new technology comes out, things change. And Ørsted and US Wind wanted to use larger turbines, thus also cutting the amount of turbines that would need to be built to produce the amount of energy that they were looking at. There were about 1,000 people that showed up to that. I think like 300 to 400 people spoke out. And while local elected officials were largely opposed to the projects, the community itself is very supportive of the projects. And when you look at the elected officials, the local electeds, the mayor of Ocean City or what have you, that came out against it, and you also do a little digging into their donations and some of the other decisions they have, you might see why they're opposed to these offshore wind projects. Funny how that works. But regardless, the community is very supportive. There's been a lot of support from CCAN and other local organizations on the Eastern Shore, and we were happy with the PSC's decision to approve the new turbines. That is the last news that I have so far. We're just continuing to monitor and support in any way we can, but that news is great news. So that is all for me, guys. I apologize if I rambled a little bit. I get really kind of worked up, especially after seeing that video, and I have a lot to say, so hard to keep it all compact. And I apologize. I do not recall who is speaking next.
Oh, I do. I'll take care of that. Thank you, Anthony. I'm so glad you brought up the safety issue, because that's one that's really stuck in my craw for years, and especially after the most recent Baltimore incident. That was such a tragedy. Those people were killed. Oh, it's just awful. And then the gas company's not taking any responsibility for it. It was the user's problem created. So anyway, moving right along, Susan Olsen. Susan, are you?
Yeah.
I'm here.
Let me reshare my screen. I apologize.
As we said before, Susan is Sierra Club Maryland chapter, and she's chair of the Lower Eastern Shore group, giving us a local view of what's going on.
Local perspective. Okay. Yes. Hi, everybody. I decided to talk about flooding on the Eastern Shore because I think it creates a severe risk to pipeline safety. Okay. The flooding on the Eastern Shore is not just caused by heavy rain, but also by sea level rise and erosion. I'm going to start out in Dorchester County because it's considered ground zero for climate change on the Eastern Shore. It's kind of a canary in a coal mine. Environmental problems usually show up in Dorchester County first and then gradually are seen in the other counties. As Anthony told you, the Del Mar pipeline will be situated in Wicomico and Somerset counties. However, climate change from the release of methane gas will affect all of us, no matter where we live. Okay, Anthony, go ahead now. Anthony's doing my slides. Okay, I'm going to start with the disappearance of Holland Island. This is in Dorchester County, where 360 people used to live. This was a prosperous community. They had, the people who lived there had very nice homes and they made good livings. But sea level rise and erosion wore away the island until there was just this one house left, and it was finally swept into the sea in 2010. Okay, Anthony. Okay, this is a picture from Wroten Island, also in Dorchester. On Wroten Island, this cemetery is falling into the sea. And this is a problem that we've had, that we're having all in other places on the Eastern Shore, and more. On the island, the roads need constant repair and the forests are dying. For example, the pine trees can't take the salt water, and so as they're more and more exposed to the salt water, they die. New homes are being built at least a foot higher than they used to be, and school buses are having a hard time getting down some of the roads. So flooding is a serious problem here as in other places. Okay, Anthony. Next. Okay. This is an example of sunny day flooding in Salisbury. Sunny day flooding, you've probably seen a lot of pictures of sunny day flooding in Miami and in Florida, that area. It's become a very common occurrence in Salisbury. Flash floods are happening more often. And I personally drive to Salisbury, and this week I just have to have my oil pan in my car replaced because it became damaged from all the salt water on the roads. I mean, you drive through this and it splashes up into, the underbelly of the car. Okay, next. Okay, this flooding is on Route 13 after a heavy rain, and none of these, I'm not showing you any pictures from the after effects of hurricanes or severe, this is all like after heavy rain, maybe a thunderstorm or so. So this is where, Anthony, you're gonna have to correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought this is where the pipeline is set to begin along Route 13.
Yeah, it's going to be built parallel to Route 13, correct?
Yes, okay. All right, and then next. Okay, now this is a picture of the entrance to UMES after a heavy rain. This is where the Chesapeake Utilities Project pipeline will be. It'll be bifurcated, part will go to UMES and the other part to the prison, ECI. But this is after a heavy rain. All right, and why does all this matter? Okay, the problem is this, the rain, and of course now it's exacerbated by the sea level rise and erosion. So the ground, it causes the ground to shift and swell. And the pipes can move, and it damages the pipelines. It creates leaks of methane and other greenhouse gases. And what's very alarming is that the workers who are trying to fix the leaks they have difficulty finding them, especially if they're underwater. And we haven't quite answered that question yet. What happens when all of these pipelines are underwater? They must be much more expensive to fix, but we're looking for answers to questions like that to find out how skilled they are at doing that sort of thing. Because remember, in the past 30 years, sea level rise has doubled, okay? It's doubled. And by, it's expected to go further, another 3.7 feet in maybe another 20 years. Anthony, what you doing?
Sorry, my computer's not cooperating.
Okay. It wasn't me this time. Okay. Anyway, it's I think it's 3.7 feet more in the next 30 years. So that's a lot of water. That's a lot of rise, and we don't know what it's going to do to the pipelines. And that those leaks of methane and other greenhouse gases and other poisons are going to leak onto our agricultural fields. They're going to get in the water table. You know, it's just a very dangerous situation. Okay, we can move now. Okay, also storms cause problems during pipeline construction, and I got this from Frack Tracker Alliance, yeah, I said that right, okay. The work areas and trenchers can, and Anthony mentioned the trenches, okay. Work areas and trenchers can alter the flow of floodwaters and spill water onto farmland or backyards. And at the drilling sites, rainwater can carry spills of bentonite, which is a drilling mud, into waterways. So the flooding is a serious problem when you think about especially how it's going to do nothing but increase. This pipeline is a 30-40 year commitment, and that's a long time. The seas are going to be rising all that time. So we feel this is a very dangerous situation and needs to be addressed before we invest $100 million in it. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Susan. It's really interesting to see the data on what we know are going to be real threats to these pipelines, as you point out. Thank you for doing that. And our next speaker is John Groutt, who's, I think, as we said, is with the Wicomico Environmental Trust. John?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thanks. As I'm listening to people, I'm realizing I live in Eden. Currently, the pipeline that's proposed will end in Eden, which is some miles away from us over by Route 13. Eden is supposed to be paradise, and maybe this is bringing gas to paradise, it might be mentioned. My remarks are going to talk about three ghosts, phantoms of what once existed, and served us very well in many ways. But they now present a far more ominous perspective. I believe the pipeline, and I'm going to be speaking more directly about the proposed Delmarva pipeline, but many of the ghosts are present in all of those that we're discussing tonight. And the three ghosts that I've called them as such are three phantoms that are haunting us, are the ghost infrastructure that we're going to end up with, the ghost technology that we're developing or proposing, and ghost jobs, which are disappearing. The first ghost is the infrastructure. The world's leading climate scientists warn that we have 10 short years to drastically reduce the fossil fuel and move away from it, or we will live on a planet that we're beginning to see with horror on our TV screens that people are mentioning tonight. The problem is that Governor Hogan wants us to kickstart, he says, a gas pipeline expansion across Maryland. If we build these pipeline projects, we're moving backwards, spending Maryland tax dollars on an outmoded infrastructure that in a very short time will become what some are calling ghost infrastructure. Today on the Eastern Shore, we can look at abandoned beds of rail tracks that once carried freight cars loaded with seafood from Crisfield north to Philadelphia and New York. Those rails are now torn up, and an empty linear trail is left in their place down to Crisfield. The proposed Delmarva pipeline would run north and south along the spine of the Delmarva Peninsula along Route 13, as we've heard, and will join those abandoned tracks within a few years as being abandoned. And I fear our heirs will be questioning the short-sightedness of us who built and paid for it when we knew without doubt it was already an outmoded technology before we ever built it. That brings us to our second ghost after infrastructure. The second ghost is ghost technology. The state is doing the Eastern Shore no favor in giving us what we know to be outdated technology that the market has already declared bankrupt. Chesapeake Utilities is the company that was awarded the Delmarva pipeline contract. It has no future. It declared bankruptcy in June, where you've given the pipeline to a bankrupt company. Maryland taxpayers will pay the loss since the contract company, has protected itself through bankruptcy. Most of the world is no longer putting new investment in gas and fossil fuels, but it's obviously moving instead to clean, renewable energy from solar and wind. These don't leave us with a dangerously hotter planet, rising floodwaters, polluted air and water, newly treated ghost forests, which we heard about from Susan, and now unprotected land due to flooding with salt-laden seawater from the increasingly regular flooding, which is destroying local jobs in the major sustainable industries that the Eastern Shore now has, which are forestry and farming. I've watched and looked at farms that are no longer productive. They can no longer grow crops because the floodwaters are, the rising tides are bringing the water up into the ditches, which are in most of Somerset County and much of Wicomico and certainly Dorchester, and infiltrating us with salt water, which is killing. You can see ghost forests everywhere and now ghost fields where nothing will grow. So we're losing the industries that we do have with the flooding, forestry and farming, and that brings us to our third ghost, and that is ghost jobs. One of the arguments supporting the pipeline is it will bring jobs into the area. Now we know that most of the construction jobs for the pipeline will last only a few months and then not be done by locals. However, permanent jobs could be provided, and many, many more of them, by expanding an energy industry supplied locally by solar and wind, and ironically at increasingly lower costs as the technology improves, and without posing dangers to health. If we meet the stated Maryland goal of raising our renewable portfolio to 50%, in other words, 50% of our energy will come by the year 2030, in 10 years, and studies show that we have no reason to believe this isn't possible. It is estimated that solar and offshore wind resources will create approximately 24,000 jobs in 10 years by 2030. If we're talking about jobs, this is the way to go. It was in 2016 that the Maryland General Assembly passed the original Clean Energy Jobs Act. And we have now actually achieved its goal of getting 25% of our electricity from renewable resources. Between 2015 and 2016, 1 year, the solar industry grew 20 times faster than the overall Maryland economy. There was a second Maryland Clean Energy Jobs Act passed in 2019, just last year, which requires the state to get half of our energy, 50%, from renewable energy, such as wind and solar, by 2030, within 10 years. And hopefully the plan in place to reach 100% renewable energy by 2040. And the added bonus to this is it will not result in releasing deadly methane gas into the air, which gas will do. And methane is 80 times more powerful for heating the earth than CO2 is over 20 years. 80 times more powerful. Think of what that will do in 10 years with what we're seeing in California. The gas pipelines are going in the opposite direction. They contradict Maryland's energy plans, spending money to build an already outdated system that will leave us with abandoned infrastructure within a few decades, while other parts of the country will have been investing in renewable energy infrastructure and will have permanent jobs well established in these industries, while we're stuck with no jobs in dead industries. Infrastructure for renewable looks forward, with a proven record of continually lowering costs due to improved technology. Fossil fuels move us backwards toward a dying industry carrying the baggage of depletion, pollution, dangers to health, and higher costs. The contrast is very stark. It raises the question why anyone would want to invest in it. We might ask the governor why. The past, however, has a way of holding us captives to what we're familiar with, and maybe that's where we are. The Wicomico Environmental Trust asks you to become actively engaged, as Anthony has suggested at the beginning of this meeting, in deciding which kinds of technology we want to expand on the Eastern Shore and throughout Maryland. An outmoded, dangerous source supplied by an already bankrupt company that brings serious health and environmental issues, including increased flooding, pouring salt water on productive farmland and forests, and leaving them newly dead ghosts. Or do we want to expand in a forward-looking system that will provide electric power at lower costs and without harmful results? We believe the Eastern Shore of Maryland, the Eastern Shore, and the state of Maryland citizens deserve a clean and prosperous future with new jobs, along with healthy and productive soils and air and water free of the remains of carbon fuels originating in the Ice Age. It's really time to stop burning dead dinosaurs. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. I really appreciate it. I love you. We're running a little bit behind, so I'm going to ask Diana to go ahead and start. Diana Younts is our next speaker, and she's chair of the Climate Justice Wing of the Maryland Legislative Coalition, founding member. Thank you so much.
Well, my credentials keep growing as you talk.
Oh, good.
But I'm talking today because of this letter we drafted targeted to the Board of Public Works, and particularly Treasurer Kopp and Comptroller Franchot, because they will have such an important role in deciding whether the pipeline projects can go forward. But, and I come at this a little bit sideways. I have not been, until this letter writing effort, I haven't been involved in the pipeline issue, but what I have been involved with is state level climate action, to a lesser extent, HoCo County climate action. And as part of Tacoma Park Mobilization Environment Committee, we've been advocating for climate legislation. And this past summer, during the summer, we felt the need that it would be great for grassroots organizations to work more closely together and to speak with one voice for pieces of climate legislation. And so we joined forces with Maryland Legislative Coalition, principally led by Cecilia Plant, and formed the Climate Justice Wing. And we're in the process of determining what state level legislation we want to advocate for with one voice, and focusing on 1 to 3 pieces of legislation. And as part of that process, well, we definitely our evaluation criteria are looking at issues through an equity lens. And we first of all identified pieces of legislation that were introduced last year that seemed to, well, that were climate legislation that definitely had an equity lens. And we have sort of more specific criteria for selecting it. And so we're engaged in this process of speaking with the delegates who introduced that legislation last year, looking to see what legislation, whether that legislation will be reintroduced, and also what other new legislation to be introduced. And of course, one of the delegates that we spoke with was Delegate Lorig Charkoudian, District 20, in Montgomery County, represents Silver Spring, Tacoma Park. And we're very lucky to have her as a delegate. And she talked about her legislation that she was advocating for. But as part of her presentation to us, she talked about the pipeline fight going on the Eastern Shore. And I had sort of been generally aware of it because I've been sort of lightly involved in CCAN's efforts in that, but I hadn't really done any work, just kind of looking at CCAN's efforts in it. And, you know, Laura talked about this important decision coming before the Board of Public Works. Board of Public Works is 3 members. It's Larry Hogan, Treasurer Nancy Kopp, and Comptroller Peter Francho, who Comptroller Peter Francho lives in Tacoma Park. He lives 3 blocks from me. Members of Tacoma Park Mobilization Environment Committee, some members are friends with him. And it seemed like, you know, a great advocacy opportunity in that, you know, we can look at long-term goals of legislation to push for in January if we're lucky enough to have a real legislative session in the coming year. But, you know, in the near term, there are lots of important fights going on. And the Board of Public Works they have an important role in this particular fight. And we can have an opportunity to get them on board in agreeing with us. At least, actually, I don't really have any hope of getting Governor Hogan on board. I mean, he somehow has gotten into his head that natural gas expansion is a way to address climate change, and it's just so opposite of what is true that I figure he's kind of on that end where he sort of wants to talk a good game in some respects and sign the fracking ban, but it's not supportive. But, you know, Treasurer Kopp, she is sort of a natural ally in this. Apparently thus far has not been an ally, but a very gettable ally. It takes education to get her as an ally. And Comptroller Francho, he's a bit of a more, I mean, conservative Democrat, maybe a more business-oriented Democrat, supports the Beltway expansion, for instance, also supports small craft breweries, so, you know, that's a plus. But
so I think those are issues that we all have to deal with, and I can share a lot of information about that. We're kind of running a little behind.
Yeah, oh, I'm sorry. But I just sort of wanted to give a little bit about how I was coming at the issue. So in any case, so Laura suggested that we direct an advocacy campaign to the Board of Public Works. And I undertook writing a letter that really just builds on the work done by CCAN, principally, and by Sierra Club, and by HoCo Climate Action. And I looked at CCAN's website on this issue, looked at their supporting resources on the issue, and I summarized it all into a nice, succinct 9-page letter. Because I'm well, we're hoping we think COP and Franco will might actually read a 9-page letter, and that what it takes is for them to have a detailed understanding of why they should not grant a water quality license to these pipelines. Mm-hmm. So first of all, in the letter, I focused on, you know, how it's such nonsense that natural gas is a bridge fuel. I mean, natural gas is mostly methane, 84 times more polluting than coal. So carbon dioxide. So it's not a bridge fuel. I mean, 84 times more polluting in the 84. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little flustered. 84 times greater greenhouse gas emissions than gas emissions caused by coal. Mm-hmm. And if you look at a 20-year time frame, and natural gas contributes to 25% of actually methane, human-caused methane production contributes to 25% of the global warming that we're experiencing today. Mm-hmm. So it's just nonsense that it's a bridge fuel. And so I discussed that in the letter. The next thing I discussed is one of the things that seems to be persuasive, particularly to Treasurer Kopp, is buying into the line that, okay, you know, natural gas, it's a bridge fuel, and that in the future it can be, you know, these same pipelines can be used for renewable natural gas, which is produced by anaerobic digesters and converting arable land to energy crops. And you know, that's you know, and for the argument for that, I look principally to Sierra Club, that, you know, that's just a chimera. You know, renewable natural gas, there's really no such things. For one thing, it's a combustible gas. It has all the dangers of a combustible gas. It's 4 to 17 times more expensive to produce than natural gas. And it's, and even at that, it won't have the capability to produce enough energy to replace natural gas. So, and then Ann Haveman of CCAN gave me a lot of literature about the economics of renewable natural gas compared to renewable sources like wind and solar. And one of the most idiotic things about these pipeline projects is that for one of the pipelines, the Maryland Environmental Service called for bids that looked just at natural gas. It called for, you know, a natural gas pipeline, and didn't call for any other kind of energy solution. So didn't even consider wind, didn't consider solar, didn't consider geothermal. And all of those, you know, have been demonstrated to be cheaper alternatives to natural gas. And building out this infrastructure for natural gas just it's just the wrong way to go. These will end up being abandoned assets because they will, I mean, they'll naturally by the market be overtaken by renewable energy sources, but also by Maryland's policy, it'll be overtaken. I mean, Maryland policy right now has a greenhouse gas reduction goal of 40% by 2030. And that is likely to be increased in the next legislative session to, you know, a 60% decrease, or, you know, maybe a compromise. I know Ben Grumbles of MDE advocates a 50% decrease in greenhouse gas emissions, and natural gas will not get us there. You know,
right. Well, Diana, you're absolutely right. And I think it's just wonderful that a private citizen like yourself has decided to really try and tackle such a complicated and involved topic, and you're doing a really beautiful job. So I think now it's a good time to move on to David Smedick, who's going to summarize in other ways some of the main points that you and others have made tonight. So thank you very much, Diana. It's really a pleasure. And now David with Sierra Club, would you take it away?
Sure thing. Thanks, Betsy, and thanks, Diana. Really appreciate your letter and the work that you've been doing on that. It's been very good. So hopefully you can all see my screen now, and just let me go to present so it's full. So yeah, I was asked to to use a baseball analogy, clean up bat for us here at the end here, just kind of wrap things up in a nice little package and then transfer it over to Q&A and all those kinds of things. The first thing that I was also asked to do, though, before we get too far into that, is expand a little bit on what Diana just mentioned in terms of fossil gas alternatives. I'll use that in air quotes, or renewable natural gas, and what that really means, and is it actually a solution? Is it not? We're hearing a lot of this from the gas industry. It's actually a very concerted, coordinated effort by the gas industry to speak to the wonderful benefits and solutions associated with renewable natural gas. But if you start to scratch a little off the surface of that, you really start to, that argument starts to unwind very, very quickly. So Sierra Club partnered with Earth Justice earlier this year to dive deep into fossil gas alternatives. And it was pretty quickly uncovered from our perspective, this is not a sound investment for the economy, for the climate, or for public health. So just the super top line items that came out of this report, and I really encourage, I've got the link down at the bottom, the screenshot of the report here. It's like 25 pages. It's a pretty easy read, and it's got some important pieces in there. But again, the actual supply, potential supply even, of renewable natural gas, biogas, is very, very small. We're talking at maximum around 13% that could replace the actual gas demand in the country. So we know it's not the real solution. As Diana mentioned, it's 4 to 17 times more expensive than fossil gas. It has a bad environmental record. A lot of times when you get this gas, it is from big industrial farms, which have a lot of localized air pollution issues and nasty stuff associated with it. And as Diana was alluding to, it perpetuates the negative health impacts of combustion in homes and businesses. We know that indoor air quality can be worse than ambient air quality standards set by the EPA if you have a gas stove and poor ventilation, which unfortunately a lot of homes still have. So indoor air quality being worse than outdoor air quality is a really big problem. And there's a lot of asthma triggers that are associated with having a gas stove in your home, especially for children. So the reason that we bring this up is actually because Chesapeake Utilities has announced in June of this year, taking it all the way back to our pipelines on the Eastern Shore, Chesapeake Utilities announced that they are contracting with a biogas company to supply some biogas to the pipelines that we're fighting on the Eastern Shore. The amounts aren't really clarified. The type of biogas isn't really clarified. There's a lot of information still missing there, but it's basically an argument being used to say that, well, no, these pipelines aren't fracked gas. They're going to be clean, renewable natural gas, no problem at all. That's just not really accurate. You still have all these issues that we're speaking about here. And we wanted to get that out there and make sure that everybody's aware of that conversation that's happening associated with the Eastern Shore pipelines and the realities of fossil gas alternatives. So that's one thing that I wanted to put a little bit of a bow on there. And the other piece here that I was asked to talk about briefly is we do have clean solutions. I want to take a step back really to remembering the video that Anthony played at the very beginning of this. We talk a lot about pipelines and wetlands crossings and really, important environmental issues associated with that. But we're talking about fuels that we use in our homes, that are in our kitchens, they're under our beds, they're under our living rooms through the pipes. And this is a dangerous combustible product, but we have really clean alternatives instead of this. And again, this is important for the pipeline discussion on the Eastern Shore because we talk a lot about the Eastern Correctional Institute. We talk a lot about the University of Maryland Eastern Shore, but this is also opening the gates to the rest of Somerset County to be a new gas customer. In Somerset County right now, and our folks from the Eastern Shore can speak to this a lot more, they actually don't have access to gas. They burn fuel oil, wood, kerosene, propane, et cetera, which are really, really expensive deliverable fuels when compared to alternatives. But we can leapfrog gas. We can not worry about that 40, 50-year-old conversation about bridge fuels and go right to clean, cost-effective heat pump technology, solar technology, wind, offshore wind. All of these things now are plummeting in price. They are studies from the U.S. Department of Energy this summer were presented to the Maryland Department of the Environment and other stakeholders, citing that 95% of oil homes in Maryland, 99% of propane homes in Maryland can cost effectively switch to electric heat pumps at the time that they need to replace their furnaces. This is not some scam. This is now when we can switch from those more expensive fuels and deliverable fuels right to electric heat pumps in our homes and small businesses instead of having this gas discussion. It's critical for climate, but it's also an economically sound choice. So we know that we have these rules and laws that are actually out there pushing us in this direction. So it's just, as every speaker has said, it is contradictory to Maryland laws, and now it's contradictory to basic economics for the state. We should not be investing in fossil fuels anymore. We need to be moving forward. So I do want to, I'm going to close here with one last slide that kind of summarizes these main points again so that people really grapple in on what we're dealing with and how we're asking you to take action moving forward. We have our legislative requirements to combat climate pollution and grow clean energy. We banned fracking. We should not be using fracked gas anymore in this state. And it is doubly insulting, in my opinion, to be pushing for expansion of fossil fuel infrastructure at ground zero for climate impacts in the state of Maryland on the Eastern Shore that Susan was talking about when it comes to sea level rise and that John has cited are on his doorstep. These are places that we should be investing heavily into clean energy solutions and clean jobs moving forward. And that's the direction that we need to be telling the Board of Public Works and MDE to be moving. So we cited already again, what are you doing next week this time? You should be on a public hearing with the Maryland Department of the Environment on the Chesapeake Utilities Pipeline wetlands license. Get on there, speak your mind, talk about what this means to you and what it means to the state. And then look for more information coming up on the BPW meetings, the Board of Public Works meetings with Treasurer Kopp and Comptroller Franchot and Governor Hogan. As Anthony alluded to, we're looking at probably mid to late October for the first decision point with them, and then a subsequent one in November and December on the Chesapeake Utilities Pipeline. And then again, we'll have the links to the petition, the organizational sign-on letters that Anthony and Diana mentioned. And we really need to start getting this word out there and getting people activated and engaged. It's starting. You're on this call. This is one of the first steps, but let's keep this stuff rolling because we don't have time and we don't have the health to spare anymore when it comes to fighting climate action. We need to get off these fossil fuels as quickly as possible. So I tried to put a bow on it. Hopefully it worked. And I'll hand it back to Betsy to give us through some Q&A.
Thank you so much, David. You did do exactly that. Nice, succinct, passionate wrap up for us to move ahead with the actions in the upcoming weeks. So now we're nicely set to take a few questions here. My friends and colleagues, Ruth Alice and Liz, have been harvesting, I believe, the questions from the chat board and may have some other questions that have come across. So I'm going to turn things over to Ruth Alice and or Liz now to address that.
This is Ruth Alice. Paul Basic from Our Revolution had a comment. He said he had to leave early. That Sunrise and Our Revolution and others supporting the Green New Deal feel that we need to get to net zero by 2030. this is more ambitious than the legislative goals. What do you think about that? David or Anthony or anyone?
Yeah, is that just an open question?
Yeah.
I'm, speaking as a relative, for those who don't know, I recently moved to the area from Texas only about a year ago. And previously to that, I was a political organizer, wasn't specifically focused on climate work. So without necessarily having the huge background of context that David might have in terms of how the Maryland legislature works and Maryland is a state, personally, I am a huge supporter of the Green New Deal. I am involved and in leadership with the local Sunrise Hub. I've phone banked and I work tirelessly for candidates in support of the Green New Deal, and I'm completely on board with their, and people call it a more ambitious goal, but frankly, it's a goal that we need to reach. It's not just ambitious, it's necessary in my eyes. And I'd love to see Maryland rapidly increase their transition to net zero. David, I'm sure you might have some more insight on whether or not Maryland will likely do that, but that is my personal standpoint. And I know CCAN, we've been a strong proponent of like CJA, this climate stimulus bill that we're working on this session, all kind of comes into increasing clean energy jobs, moving away from fossil fuels, reducing our emissions and what have you.
I probably won't add too much more for the sake of time to what Anthony said. I think the more ambitious goals that we can get locked in through legislation, the better. So let's keep pushing and see what we can accomplish. And I believe that there was discussion last year in Annapolis about a 2045 net zero target. Right now in the state statute, it is just, we have a mandate to achieve 40% reductions by 2030 and a goal of 80 to 95% reductions by 2050. But I know that there's interest in becoming more ambitious than that. The only other thing that I would point to that I admit I am still learning a lot about is the newly released Thrive agenda from a bunch of national organizations at the national level, which is another, I think, a supplement or partnership with the Green New Deal work in terms of recovery from the pandemic. That's another big push. So, but for the sake of time, happy to keep moving with Alice.
I guess I can do the next one from JP about a discussion about alternative methods of fuel switching, electrification, cost savings. I don't know if that's all related to the MES proposal just for frack gas, and what can we do about that, or what can we do about MES? Anybody have any answers on that one?
Susan, are you speaking?
I'm trying to formulate my thoughts here. Okay. Can you repeat that question? Just part of it.
I think the question was, is there a discussion about alternative methods for powering UMES and or the prison? But I mean, I think that was kind of foreclosed when MES put out the bid just for frack gas. Is that correct?
Well, what happened was the company based this on a 4-year-old study, and they did not give renewable energies, and they didn't give them that option. They could only choose gas. So that's a problem, and that's a problem that I think we need to work on, because for example, UMES got a lot of attention for being the green, historically black college. It was one of the top in the whole United States. They started out with a lot of solar energy. So it's a little bit, I'm very curious why, I was very curious why they didn't go for that more renewable energy, because it was successful for them, but I found out that they didn't even have an option to choose it. So I think that's a really big thing that we need to hit back with is, this study was too old, and it didn't give anybody the opportunity. It did to choose renewable energy. So.
Yeah, there must be a story behind it.
Well, David, I know that you've been on the Buildings Ad Hoc Committee of the Mitigation Working Group that's been discussing combined heat and power, which usually uses fracked gas, which is the alternative that they're looking at.
Yeah, briefly, thanks, Alice. I would say, I think someone's been putting in the chat, and I'll work on another response in there for folks. But geothermal is definitely an option. I think that Anthony and CCAN have dug up a whole bunch of information about a number of universities and colleges that have transitioned to geothermal heating systems. So it's not an unprecedented move when we're dealing with some of the alternative being gas-fired combined heat and power. Geothermal is a good option if you have the resources, the ground resources for it. And then two other things I would point to, building off of the chat a little bit as well. There was a flag about cold weather heat pumps and cold climate heat pumps. That is an important distinction. There are some older heat pumps from the 70s and 80s that are not as efficient as the newer versions, and the newer versions work wonderfully in cold climates. Can work in as low as -15 degrees Fahrenheit. So that issue that we used to hear about heat pumps not working in cold climates is no longer really an issue. And then the last newer technology, well, it's been around for a while, but it's gaining a lot more momentum for large commercial spaces and big institutions on campuses, et cetera, is something called variable refrigerant flow, or VRF. It's a bigger version of heat pumps. But there's a group that I'm going to put into the chat here, and we can share on later, called the Northeast Energy Efficiency Partnership, NEEP. They have a whole bunch of information about everything heat pump, variable refrigerant flow, all sorts of alternatives to ways that we can heat our buildings that we're trying to push back the gas system on. So I'll put that stuff in the chat as well.
Wonderful. Gail is asking, how does Hogan expect to achieve the goals of the GGRA? And David, I know that you're monitoring what the Mitigation Working Group is doing and submitting to the Maryland Climate Commission, that will be submitting a report to the governor, a report that the state will use to submit to the legislature from the governor. All of that. Can you give us a little bit about that timeline, and can the public still have input into that?
Sure thing. So there's a few things that are happening simultaneously right now when it comes to the long-term planning that Maryland Department of the Environment and the governor are undergoing right now. So the Maryland Commission on Climate Change is a independent agency from the state government, although it has a lot of state government officials on it, but there are a lot of public members as well. That Commission on Climate Change annually puts out a report on progress fighting climate adaptation opportunities, and within it, it is supposed to include a series of recommendations that the governor, the General Assembly, and others in Maryland can take to continue to reduce climate pollution. For the last 4 or 5 years, they have failed every single year to put forward any actual recommendations that provide an actual reduction in climate pollution. It's all about further study, which study is important, but we know ways to reduce pollution, and they're not doing that. So there are opportunities coming up. I'll send around this information as well, maybe put it in the chat in the last couple of minutes. The group that works on mitigation efforts of the Commission on Climate Change, so actual pollution reduction programs, they are seeking proposed recommendations to reduce pollution through next Thursday, and they're going to be discussing them at a public meeting later in the month, and then in early October again. So the commission's going through its process. The other last thing I'll be brief on, the governor submitted a draft 2030 climate action plan in January of this year, or it might have been almost a year ago now. They are suggesting that their final plan is going to be public by the end of this year. So that is a it's drafted by the Maryland Department of the Environment, but is applicable across all agencies and has recommendations for the General Assembly to take. There are a variety of things within there that I don't know if we have a whole lot of time to get into all the details of how they say they're going to meet their goals. But
4 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. So again, I'll put
maybe we need another panel.
I'll put on some websites in the chat that you guys can check out for those information pieces. Sorry about that. Go ahead, Liz or Betsy.
It's great.
Is that's a year? Is that the one that's a year late?
Yes.
It's a whole year late too, correct?
That is the report that is a year late. And I'm sure that CCAN and the Sierra Club will have a lot of comments, have had comments in the past, and will continue to have comments on it.
Mm-hmm.
Not only that it's late, but that it could be substantially improved. And there are a lot of false detours, false promises in it, like the promise of RNG or things that are chimeras, wonderful word, that look good but really aren't realistic.
Don't they also call for the
real solutions?
Don't they also call for the use of carbon capturing technology that's not even like invented yet?
Yes. Yeah. They call for a lot of things that aren't operational yet, that are sort of wishful thinking, sort of Disneyland of the future, that are sort of Republican mantras that we can solve climate change by by funding these things. And one thing, as we're wrapping up, that is just a suspicion of mine, is the state of Maryland going to be subsidizing this RNG? Because state institutions don't have a lot of money. And how could they afford to pay for something that's in short supply and very, very expensive? And certainly the homes in Somerset County will not be choosing that when it's 17 times as expensive as natural gas, as frack gas.
Well, that may be the answer. Well, I think it's 29 after 8.
Right. Which means that we as the taxpayers, so Betsy, I was going to do the wrap up.
Okay.
So we will go over the chat and try to respond to any points that we haven't hit yet, and keep you all informed of these many threads that are continuing into the future, both on the Eastern Shore and things that have implications for all of Maryland. And we want to thank all of our fantastic speakers and sponsors and co-sponsors and everyone here. You'll get a follow-up email and we'll send a copy of the Zoom and more on all of the resources from our speakers and action and things that we've shared in the chat, and more things that have been mentioned and actions you can take.
Terrific. Thank you.
All.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. It's been a wonderful evening for me. I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did.
Learned a lot.
We learned a lot, and it just shows you how much more there is to learn and to do. So we'll all be in touch. It'll be a busy season, busy couple of weeks after this. So with that, I'll say good night. And Anthony, are you the overall